welcome to the Scramble. Thanks for joining us. I'm Tommy Laren. Well, the big election may be 2 years away, but it's never too early to speculate on the issues, contenders, and outliers. Today, that's exactly what we're going to do when our panelists have the opportunity to put that UNLV political science education to use. First, we'll discuss one of the most pressing issues on the agendas of both parties, immigration reform. How can Democrats and Republicans tackle this issue? Is comprehensive reform possible? We shall find out. Next, we'll move to the rapidly approaching 2014 midterm elections. Who will take control of what, by how much, and how will this impact American politics domestically as well as internationally? Finally, we will tackle the big race. Who are the rising stars in each party? I'll ask our panelists to speculate party platforms as well as top contenders for that coveted seat in the big White House on Pennsylvania Avenue. But before we start politicking, I'd like to take a moment to introduce our panel. First, we welcome back Alex Valto, a junior in political science with a minor in Brookings Public Policy. Next, we have David Sarabian, a senior in political science and former State Department intern. We move to Daniel Wakar, a junior in history with a minor in Brookings Public Policy. And finally, we welcome Christian Bateau, a graduate student in communication with a thesis on campaigns. It is a subject former Florida Governor Jeb Bush coined an act of love, not a felony. Yes, immigration reform has been on the agenda for several years, yet nothing game-changing has been accomplished. Party polarization is largely to blame. Last year, the Senate passed a comprehensive reform package, which included a citizenship path for an estimated 8 million of more than 11 million illegals in the country. Roughly one-third of Senate Republicans supported the measure, but the Republican-controlled Congress has stalled the package in an attempt to approach the issue with a more incremental path to legalization. Immigration activists and some Democrats are pushing the president to use the power of the pen to settle the debate. The administration could shift non-criminals and minor offenders to the lowest deportation priorities in a re-examination of deportation policy. It is important to note that under this president, deportation numbers have far exceeded those of previous administrations, leading some to dub him the deporter-in-chief. What is the next step? Alex, let's toss it to you on immigration.
Well, I think that we need to progress ahead with comprehensive immigration reform. I think that though it might seem infeasible now, it is possible in the future considering the upcoming elections. I think the Republicans will need to change their perspective on immigration, have to be more open. I think that the incremental approach doesn't necessarily work. There's a huge issue with the programs that the Republicans are majorly pushing, which are more for high-tech workers coming to the U.S. I think that largely the demand that has been spoken about for high-tech workers is artificially created by a lot of these corporations. And you see this because you can prove this because there hasn't been an increase in wages on the STEM workforce when there has been proclaimed a decrease in supply of workers.
You realize one of the biggest obstacles to immigration reform is not just the Republican House, but Senate Majority Leader Reid, who won't adopt this incremental approach. There have been approaches proposed by the Republicans in order to have this incremental approach to immigration reform. It's not like they're anti-immigration reform whatsoever. They're taking
a different way.
Just a different way.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah, and the portion that I disagree with is the incremental approach they're pursuing.
Right, and it's not going to happen before 2014, before this election, or even it's even unlikelier before 2016 because of this. His unwillingness to take an incremental approach.
Do we think comprehensive reform is possible, Daniel?
I think it definitely is possible, but like I said, I don't think it's possible before 2014 because of that observation.
David, I want to move to you. Do you think that regarding Alex's point about putting the heat on the Republican Party to consider immigration, do you think that that's going to happen before 2014 midterm elections?
Probably before 2014 midterm elections. Immigration reform the Republican Party is going to support is going to concern H-1B visas. Neil Ruiz from Brookings Institution, the plans that he's put into place in the policy briefs has been very well welcomed by members in Congress on both sides of the issue.
Okay.
And flat out what Alex said about there not being H-1B demands is just wrong.
There's demand by...
You're using the metric of wages, you're not using the metrics of actual H-1B demands. H-1B demands, starting April 1st, you start to put in the applications.
Here's the problem.
In recent years, as little as a week, the slots have filled up. So the demand is still there.
I think that doesn't deny my argument. My claim is that...
I said you're using the wrong metric.
No, I'll respond to that. My claim is that the H-1Bs are not necessary for our economy because there are other workers that can fill those jobs. Yes, there is a demand for H-1Bs by foreigners who want to get into the country on a STEM workforce. Whether or not there's an actual demand for more STEM workers, which are the jobs recipients of H-1Bs go on to, is in question. I claim that there's not, otherwise you would have seen prices or wages increase, which you haven't seen. Corporations always want H-1Bs because you can pay them subprime wages. That's why they're more beneficial for the economy while they screw over domestic workers.
Do you guys think that that's going to be the main issue, though, or do you think it's going to be more of the core of immigration? Christian, I want to ask you about that.
I think regardless of what side are taken or the initial parts of the piecemeal reform that either party is trying to take, I think it's a major issue for both sides to jump on before the midterm elections. It's important, particularly, we'll get to this issue later, but the voting blocks that generally don't come out in the midterm elections, the Latino voters, the black voters, the women, this would be a primary signal for either party to kind of rally around. So regardless of what those kind of initiatives that end up getting through, which there's a debate whether or not they're ultimately going to be effective, it's a potential or a possibility for either party to kind of latch onto that. I think the Republicans have a good chance, particularly because they have not had a great success with the Latino voting bloc before, but it depends on who decides to take the lead on those
and I definitely
issues.
do want to discuss that as we move more towards 2014 and then looking towards 2016 as well. And I wanted to ask you guys, just as far as I mentioned the power of the pen, using the president's power to do this, do you think that this is going to alienate Republicans?
So the Constitution specifically outlines the powers of Congress and the powers of the president. And one of the powers of Congress is to regulate naturalization and immigration. President Obama has completely taken that power from Congress and given it to himself via that executive order. He's unilaterally allowing some of these people to stay in this country and lifting that power away from Congress. And that's probably one of the biggest unconstitutional power grabs that we've seen in a while.
The executive branch has the ability to enforce those laws. It's not like he's turning a blind cheek to a lot of the laws.
He's
just
rewriting
enforcing them a little more loosely, which are in line with a lot of recent Supreme Court's interpretations of DOMA.
You're taking the most nuanced approach and giving our president the benefit of the doubt. He's
prime example. They're no longer, immigration reform is no longer enforcing the DOMA restrictions on the ability for foreigners who have a same-sex partner staying in the United States.
That's a different issue, but even that
Based
is
on
still,
the court's
you still need to,
interpretation,
you're taking away that legislative power from Congress to be able to
when Congress is
remake those immigration
and not working.
When it's
that's a different
gridlock,
issue.
there needs to be some sort of initiative taken.
So would you agree with that, Christian? Do you think you should use the power of the pen to go ahead and push this through?
If we are looking for some immediate results, that seems to be the only way that this can happen, particularly because there's gridlock in the House and there has been no major pushes, at least on the part of Congress, to make anything to progress the bill. So, I mean, if we were to argue we want immediate results, that's the most likely
Do we
scenario.
need immediate results? David, I want to ask you about that. Do we need to see something now, or can it wait till both sides are able to come to compromise?
The Republicans need something now to give an attempt to help them out in the future. And that's the thing, is you're asserting the president's using those executive orders and how Congress is in charge of that. Well, then why doesn't Congress reassert their power? And before you stop me, the thing is, they have gridlock. They've got gridlock in the House. When does the House come up with some immigration reform that they know will pass? And they haven't. And the Republicans need to get more of the Hispanic vote in order for them to be successful. Now, here's the thing. As Obama's been called the deporter-in-chief, that's a fact, in that he has deported more people than the Bush administration does.
Right.
However, the view among Hispanics is that the Republicans are going to try to kick them out. Perception is reality. It doesn't really matter that Obama's deported that many people. The Hispanics, in their view, see that the Republicans are bad for them. And so they're not going to vote for them. For the Republicans, if they want a better chance of success, whether or not the Hispanics will believe it or not, is to try and push that immigration reform.
Daniel, let's address that.
Hispanics are not a monolith. They don't vote all alike. They don't see issues.
I never suggested that.
Well, that's what you're implying right there.
Just like everybody implies with every other specific ethnic group.
All right, well, let Daniel finish your point.
Sure. The second thing is, one of the biggest issues in the 2014 midterm election is not going to be immigration reform. I think it's going to be Obamacare, as well as the issue of income inequality. These are the two issues.
And voter turnout.
As well as voter turnout.
Okay.
These are the two issues that the Republicans and Democrats, respectively, want to frame the 2014 midterm election on. And this is what the 2014 midterm is going to be about. It's not going to be about solely immigration reform. The third thing that I want to mention is that we elect politicians to make tough decisions. They're not always going to be right. They're not always going to be fair. Not everybody's going to be happy. But we elect politicians to make the tough decisions. And if we're going to ignore the Constitution and allow President Obama to use an executive order to unilaterally allow tens of thousands of people to stay in this country and usurp that power from the legislative branch, then we have a bigger problem.
I just want to say, I think there's a little bit of like contradictions in the claim that Obama's the deporter-in-chief and that he's unilaterally acting to allow all immigrants to come in or loosening the fences. I think that there's a little bit of a contradiction there.
There's also a little bit of politics at play here. The people who are going to turn out for the Democrats and vote in 2012, which is when he did the executive order, as well as in 2014, are the people who are going to be affected by this decision.
I think kind of what you said earlier about, and what kind of Bato alluded to, is the voter turnout is such a huge issue in the midterms, and that's the big concern for Democrats, is getting people out to vote, which is why David's arguments about Hispanic voters moving towards the Democratic Party, even if not monolithically or universally, more generally, is going to be a large factor in how.
You know, Alex, this is what I want to address as well. I mean, we will discuss this as we move more towards 2016 talks, but I want to ask you, what do we think about players like Jeb Bush, who are taking a little bit more of a lenient stance, a little bit more moderate? Of course, there's some pushback from the grassroots of the party, but what do you think about leaders like this? And Daniel, I'd like to have you answer that as well, but Alex, let's take it first.
I mean, I think that's very strategic. I think Jeb Bush is one of the better candidates over like Rand Paul, I mean, Chris Christie.
And we'll get into all of that, but what do you think about the core of the Republican Party? Do you think there's going to be infighting over immigration?
I think there will be infighting, and it might end up hurting them if there becomes a third-party candidate that runs, like if, say, Rand Paul decides to run for election, which I think he would realize was unstrategic for the Republican Party.
Right.
But if that were to occur, it might split the vote. But it will take away some moderate liberals that see Jeb Bush as being more in line with their beliefs.
But speaking from a strictly political, campaign-oriented point of view, if you want to be the Republican nominee for president, you first have to win the Republican nomination. And I don't know if Jeb Bush was sitting on the sidelines not watching what happened to Mitt Romney in 2012. And he's taking this kind of lighter stance, which is not what the grassroots wants. This is the grassroots who nominate the Republican nominee for president are taking the exact opposite stance of Jeb Bush.
I just don't know if the Tea Party is going to win out. I don't know. I'd be interested in hearing your thoughts.
I'd probably agree that alienating the base would be a mistake for the Republican Party. As far as a political strategy, you need to get out of the primaries first. I think Jeb Bush, if he is able to get out of that kind of position, he provides the biggest threat, in my opinion, to Hillary Clinton. Because she is unimpeded. We'll get to this issue a little bit later.
Absolutely. We'll definitely address Hillary in upcoming discussions. But just back to immigration reform, what do you think about Jeb Bush's stance? Do you think more Republicans are going to come out in a more moderate view, or do you think it's going to stay grassroots at the base?
It's tough to say. Obviously, we have to look to the 2014 midterm elections as well to see what the control is and what the GOP has, I guess, at their disposal. But as far as his stance in particular, I think he provides a very breath of fresh air from what has been kind of forwarded by the current, I guess, the House, the Tea Party movement, a lot of the kind of grassroots of the Republican Party. It would be a welcome addition of new ideas, but it'd be interesting.
And I want to ask you guys, just kind of moving away from different party platforms, what do you guys think is the best solution to immigration reform? Shut down the borders? Profiling? What are we going to do? How do we tackle this? I'm going to ask you guys to kind of speculate on that. Alex, what do you think? What do we do?
I think we need to deal with a lot of the people that are here and try to give them a path to citizenship, as opposed to sending people out of the country. Is that amnesty? I mean, it could be interpreted as amnesty. I think that wouldn't be a bad thing. The faster you allow people to integrate into society, the faster you stop trapping people into like cycles of poverty, and you allow people to become fully functioning citizens. I don't think that I don't like a lot of the pushes for high-tech workers, the H-1Bs, I don't necessarily agree with a lot of that. I do agree with some of the startup visa aspects and allowing people to become investors to come to the U.S. As far as bringing in work supplies in the high-tech industry, I think we need to instead focus on making those workers available domestically as opposed to bringing them abroad, because that only helps the corporations. It doesn't help us make it sustainable long-term.
Daniel, I want to ask you, border enforcement, how do we move from here?
Okay, so what you really need to do is you need to enforce some of the laws that we have, and you need to clean up some of the patchwork border fence that we have on the U.S.-Mexico.
More cohesive, more consistent.
More cohesive, more consistent. There's also an issue that I think has been under-discussed here. It's the issue of drug trafficking.
Absolutely.
When you have a porous border, you have drugs being trafficked over there, from Mexico into the United States, and this is an issue that needs to be addressed clearly in immigration
Alex,
reform.
I see you grimacing. What are our thoughts here?
If you want to stop drug trafficking, you stop the war on drugs, and then you put the cartels out of business.
I agree. That's a different issue.
I don't think there's ever a time we'll be able to fully enforce the border to make it so you can't traffic drugs. There'll always be a way around.
Right.
There'll always be a way to make that into the country. The harder you make it, the more valuable the resources become.
Right, but this is also a multi-pronged issue. You clean up border enforcement, but you also provide a path to citizenship, or you also reform the visa process so that if you want to come to this country but you violate our laws, you're going to face punishment. But
Sounds
if you want to do
like
it the legitimate
comprehensive immigration reform to me.
Right. The question is piecemeal way or holistically
And the question also becomes, is an entire piece, is that going to be able to pass, or is it more strategic to do it piecemeal, like as you suggested? Right. So I guess that's what we're going to have to wait and see. And we're going to go to a break right now, but we're going to come back and we're going to talk all about the upcoming elections. Stay with us.
If you're a man over 50, you're in a group most likely to develop skin cancer, including melanoma. That's why your best shot is to check for a spot. Follow through and check your skin. Go to spotskincancer.org to find out how.
Oh, hey, bud. Oh. Where are you headed? Just gonna hang out.
It's a school night. With Gary and Todd?
Yeah.
Not sure about those two.
I've been meaning to ask you.
This is tougher than I thought.
Is there any drinking going on in this crowd?
No.
I hope not, because alcohol can lead you to say things and do things that you really wish you hadn't.
Isn't this what you're supposed to say?
I know.
So if any of your buddies ever pressure you to take a drink, just tell them you promised your dad you wouldn't.
I'd do anything to keep you safe.
Okay, I will.
I hope this is working.
I promise. Love you too, Dad.
They really do hear you.
Ryan.
Yeah?
So start the conversation even before they're teenagers.
Good idea.
For tips on what to say, visit underagedrinking.samhsa.gov. A message from the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration.
Every year, millions of young women try to change the skin they were born with and say they die for darker skin. Sadly, some actually do. Change your thinking, not your skin. Stop tanning. Learn more at spotskincancer.org.
Help support the Breast Cancer Patient Education Act, a bill that will help make sure women facing a mastectomy are told all their options about breast reconstruction. Visit broaddayusa.org for more information.
Welcome back from the break. Next, I want to move from policy consideration to the upcoming 2014 midterm elections. With the election only 7 months away, it is not too early in the game to predict which party will clean up November's midterm elections. Republicans are hoping that the rocky rollout of Obamacare and still struggling economy are issues enough to stoke enthusiasm for the GOP come fall, while Democrats are optimistic about maintaining control of the Senate and hungrier than ever to take back the House. What do you guys think? Which party has the best chances for success? And why? David, let's start with you on 2014 midterms.
I think on 2014 midterms, the Republicans have a decent shot. I've seen data go both ways. The Democrats might do better, Republicans might do better.
Decent shot of maintaining or taking over?
Of taking a little bit more seats.
Okay.
The Republicans, just because usually what happens with midterm elections in order to balance off the last election.
It's a referendum on the president's
They do
work.
referendum on the president's support. And the thing is that, but the other side of it is that the Democrats, they're seen as more moderate lately than the president
Are they
is.
moving away from Obama? I want to ask Christian about this too.
They're more central than President Obama is, whereas the Republicans have been viewed, and the Monkey Cage blog did a pretty good job on this, is the Republican candidates thus far for the midterms have seen be more to the right. And so that's an issue that's coming up. But one thing to keep in mind is, at least out west, is that I think the Democrats are going to be able to keep their seats, especially with Harry Reid last time around, and that they might even be able to gain a few more House seats out west here.
The Democrats are not winning the House. There is no way in 2014 that they
You heard it here first, guys.
They are not winning the House. The best chance they have is to play defense in 7 key states in order to maintain some sort of a majority in the Senate.
All right, let's hear it, Christian. What are they?
Louisiana, Alaska, Michigan, Montana,
North Carolina,
and I missed a couple.
Virginia.
I think West Virginia's kind of lost.
West Virginia is kind of staying the Republicans' call.
I think it's
Iowa
lost. Iowa is one of them.
Democrats.
All right.
And one more. Yeah, good teamwork.
Right.
I think that the major issue that is facing the Democrats, obviously, is Obamacare. The Republicans have done a very strong job, very good job of pouncing on that. Now I think the Democrats have a pretty decent chance of jumping on the equal pay issue that happened last weekend as an ability for them to get some sort of traction there. But again, I believe we've talked about this before. It all depends on voter turnout. If as we know, general elections, everyone comes out. That happened in 2008 and 2012. In the midterms, not so much. The women, the Latinos, the black vote, those are all up for grabs, and particularly they don't show up too well. That's not
What about 2010, though? I mean, 2010 was a pretty excellent year for the Republicans, and there was pretty good turnout in that year. Do you think we're going to see the same thing in 2014, just with these, especially with, you mentioned Obamacare, do you think that's going to have people turn out on both sides?
I think it has a very good, strong chance of doing so. I think the Republican Party has done a pretty good job just ramping up for this election, and it's going to be pretty hard for the Democrats to come back. Equal pay is what I would jump on if I were them, but it's going to be an uphill battle.
2014 will be an even better year for the Republicans than 2010. What hasn't been talked about, but as a political campaign hack, I know a little bit about this. The Republicans have improved their ground game. The Republicans have improved their data strategies. They've improved their voter contact methods so that they can figure out who's going to show up, who's in a midterm year when people typically don't show up to a general election to vote. They know exactly who will vote and who has a propensity to vote in the way of the Republicans. I think, as Christian mentioned, there are 7 key states here, and those key states will decide who holds the Senate. And the Senate is the big...
That's the big question
It's the big question here, and Mitch McConnell is going to be off the guard raising money for all these different Republican candidates across the nation to make sure that the Republicans take back the Senate.
Alex, one last thought on 2014, then I want to move to 2016.
I largely agree with what everybody's been saying. The Senate is the big issue. Nate Silver predicted about a 50-50 shot to them losing the Senate, which is fairly scary. The reason why it's so problematic is kind of twofold. First, the places where Democrats are leaving the Senate are all states where they don't have a Democrat in line to take over. So they are red states. The other issue is that the Republicans aren't losing any seats, so they can only be on the offensive, whereas Democrats have to be on the defensive. And some of the offensive has been focusing on the Koch brothers, which is not as strategic as focusing on the actual candidates.
Right. Well, now I want to move on to the big one here. So finally, I want to address the big question. Yes, the path to the White House in 2016. The election is roughly 1,000 days away, but that won't stop us from sizing up the competition. Democrats have a dominant frontrunner in Hillary Clinton, while the Republican field is wide open. Will it be Chris Christie, Jeb Bush? Will Hillary have some feminine competition from Tennessee Congresswoman Marsha Blackburn? Well, it's time to dig in. What do you guys think? 2016.
So, 2016, you can separate the contenders into 2 groups, the governors and the senators. The senators we've seen clearly are Rand Paul and Ted Cruz. And the governors, Jeb Bush, Chris Christie, Bobby Jindal, a few others. The traditional weakness for governors is foreign policy. You see that with Scott Walker, with Chris Christie making some of the flubs that they did when the Republican Jewish Coalition was here in town. They lack those strengths in foreign policy. With the senators, I think you see they have to continue to maintain media presence because they're not chief executive of a state. I think in terms of the senators, Rand Paul is the strongest contender, and in terms of the governors, Jeb Bush is clearly the strongest contender. Both of them have strong abilities to raise lots of money and to carry wide swaths of the vote.
All right, Alex, I want to ask you, Hillary, what are our thoughts on Hillary? Is she the only front runner, or are we going to see Biden enter that?
She's the only front runner until she decides not to run. I think if she decides not to run, then you have Biden, who wants to make
Do you think that's a possibility that Hillary is not going to run? Let's be realistic.
I don't think
so. She wants grandkids, man. Chelsea might have grandkids. You never know.
She's raised nearly $6 million in campaign funds already to this point.
The signs are all there.
And she's still not certain that she's going to run.
Do you really think she's not certain, Christian?
Well, I mean, I know that she's pretty good at dodging shoes, but I'm pretty sure she's also very strong and has years of experience, 2 decades on Capitol Hill.
Right.
I think she is the go-to candidate for the Democratic Party right now.
I think if she doesn't run, the backup is going to be Elizabeth Warren. I think she's in a much stronger position than Biden, even though she doesn't have as much national exposure.
Martin O'Malley, Andrew Cuomo.
Well, none of those touch the amount of liberalness that are echoing.
None of them can
Elizabeth
touch Hillary
Warren.
at this point. I think we can all agree none of them can touch Hillary. So I want to open it up. The Republicans. Who do we think is going to be the front runner? Obviously, it's very early, but do we think Chris Christie has a chance? Did Bridgegate kind of harm him in that way? What do you guys think? I want to hear from Christian. Let's start with you. Republicans, who we got?
I'd agree that Rand Paul and Jeb Bush are probably the 2 main candidates, mostly because of their Rand Paul has the ability to rally the base, and Jeb Bush has the ability to, I think, provide the biggest threat to Hillary, who I still believe is unimpeded going through the primary elections.
Do you think that it's going to be difficult for another Bush to get back in the White House?
That's a very interesting point, and possibly. You never know. It depends on what game the Democrats come with, how they're able to attach him or spin that towards another Bush legacy, or whether that legacy was good or bad in the first place. But
the name may
that'll
be
even
tricky.
come out even in the primaries, though. Rand Paul being so against war, like that's going to be the strategy.
His ability to attract new demographics in terms of talking about surveillance, in terms about talking about prison and drug reform, that attracts younger people, attracts minorities. He's made a concerted effort to talk to minorities, to talk to young people, and to groups that the Republicans have traditionally overlooked.
So Daniel, we think it's going to be Rand Paul.
I think it's definitely going to be either Rand Paul. He definitely has a strong shot. Jeb Bush definitely has a strong shot. I think Chris Christie has lost some of the bigger donors in the Republican Party after the Bridgegate scandal.
All right, David, what about you? I want to hear your 2 cents on this one. Republicans, who we got?
Republicans, we've got Jeb Bush, Rand Paul, Chris Christie. Ted Cruz is going to make a run. he's going to make a run, just at the very least to put himself out there saying that I'm trying new things. His filibuster was, as I like to put it, his opening move on the national scene. Jeb Bush, you know the attack ads are going to be, are we going to want another Bush president that's going to put us into another war in the Middle East?
I can see that as well. I can see that being a possibility.
Chris Christie, this whole Bridgegate scandal, at least to an extent.
You know, but he was cleared of that, so does that matter?
He was
cleared of that, but the view is still going to be that he tolerated some corruption.
It looked pretty bad.
That he's going to do East Coast politics. Now, Rand Paul, he's talked to minorities, but he spoke at a black college a year or two ago, and minorities don't believe him. They don't. As far as his libertarian views, the youth, you know, America's youth are very much turning more towards libertarian, so he'll be able to favor them. But the youth don't really turn out as much, nor do they necessarily have the money. And the New York Times had a very good piece about how, you know, this whole youth that Obama's like, oh yeah, the youth need to go out there and actively politically participate. They're not really doing that.
David, you're taking an isolated instance. I mean, Rand Paul has gone to...
I'm taking isolated incidents?
All right.
Right. Rand Paul has gone to UC Berkeley. He's gone all over the nation and at least made an attempt to bring about new demographics into the Republican Party.
Attempts does not mean results.
We're going to have to wait and see. We'll see if he can rally the base there. And that is all the time we have today, so now you know what we think. Let us know what you think. Share your opinions or any ideas you'd like us to scramble about to thescramble.unlv@gmail.com. You can also catch full episodes of The Scramble at UNLV-TV. For all of us here at The Scramble, thanks for joining us, and we hope to see you next time.